Let me be direct with you from the outset because what the United Arab Emirates announced at 2:30 p.m. Gulf Standard Time today represents something unprecedented in the history of Arab-Israeli relations. What we are witnessing is not a travel advisory. It is not a recommendation to avoid non-essential travel. What we are witnessing is a full evacuation order for all Emirati citizens currently in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, issued by a government that normalized relations with Israel just 6 years ago and that has positioned itself as Israel's primary Arab ally. And I need you to understand exactly what this decision reveals about what Gulf Arab states are seeing in their intelligence assessments that the rest of the world is not yet openly discussing. I am looking at the official statement released by the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs, document reference MOFA-0424-26. What it orders is not discretionary guidance. It is not a suggestion for citizens to consider leaving if concerned. What it orders is the immediate departure of all Emirati nationals from Israeli territory within 48 hours, with government chartered flights being arranged for those who cannot secure commercial transportation. The statement further prohibits all Emirati citizens from traveling to Israel or the Palestinian territories until further notice. This is a complete severing of civilian presence by a government that signed the Abraham Accords and that has invested billions of dollars in Israeli economic partnerships. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this evacuation represents the most significant indicator yet that Gulf Arab states expect imminent large-scale conflict involving Israel, why the timing suggests intelligence about Iranian military planning that has not been made public, and why what the UAE does in the next 72 hours will determine whether other Arab states follow suit and whether the Abraham Accords survive this crisis. This is the Professor Marandi report. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being deliberately underplayed by both Israeli and American officials who cannot afford to acknowledge what this evacuation actually signals. Let's start with the context of UAE-Israel relations, because understanding what the UAE is walking away from here is essential to grasping how dramatic this evacuation order truly is. The Abraham Accords, signed in September 2020, normalized diplomatic relations between Israel and the UAE. The agreement was presented by both American and Israeli officials as a historic breakthrough, the beginning of comprehensive Arab-Israeli peace that would reshape regional dynamics. Since that signing, trade between Israel and the UAE has exceeded $3 billion. Emirates Airlines launched direct flights to Tel Aviv. Israeli tourists have visited Dubai in large numbers. Emirati investment funds have purchased stakes in Israeli technology companies. According to data published by Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics, approximately 4,000 Emirati citizens were residing in or regularly traveling to Israel as of March this year. These are not diplomats. These are business people, investors, students, and tourists whose presence represented the normalization the Abraham Accords promised. The UAE has repeatedly emphasized that its relationship with Israel is strategic, not merely tactical, that it represents a long-term alignment of interests against regional threats, particularly from Iran. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about why the UAE issued a complete evacuation order for all its citizens and what intelligence assessments drove a decision that fundamentally contradicts 6 years of public policy. Announcement number 1. The UAE has received intelligence, almost certainly shared by the United States, that Iran plans to conduct direct military strikes against targets inside Israel within the next 7 to 14 days. Strikes that will involve significantly larger scale and different targets than the limited retaliatory attack Iran conducted in response to previous Israeli operations. And this one matters more than anything else because it means Gulf Arab states believe the coming conflict will be qualitatively different from anything that has occurred to this point. On April 18th, CIA Director William Burns traveled to Abu Dhabi for meetings with Emirati intelligence officials. That visit was not publicly announced. It was confirmed only after UAE state media published a brief notice of the meeting 3 days later. According to reporting by the Wall Street Journal, Burns delivered a classified briefing on Iranian military preparations based on signals intelligence and satellite reconnaissance, showing mobilization of missile units and forward deployment of weapon systems to launch sites in western Iran. The briefing reportedly included assessments that Iran is preparing to strike not only military targets, but also civilian infrastructure, potentially including Israeli power generation, water treatment, and communication facilities. The goal would not be symbolic retaliation, but actual strategic degradation of Israel's ability to function as a modern state. The UAE, which has extensive business investments and thousands of citizens who have traveled to Israel since normalization, concluded that it could not risk Emirati lives in a conflict of that scale and nature. Furthermore, according to sources cited by Al Jazeera English, the intelligence shared with Gulf states included warnings that Israel may conduct preemptive strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or Iranian leadership targets in the next 10 to 21 days, which would trigger the large-scale Iranian response. In other words, Gulf states are being told that major war between Israel and Iran is not a possibility. It is an approaching certainty. The only question is whether Israel strikes first or Iran does. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two, the evacuation is not limited to safety concerns. It represents a deliberate political decision by the UAE to distance itself from Israel in advance of a conflict the UAE does not want to be associated with or implicated in. This is the part that Israeli officials find most alarming because it suggests the beginning of strategic abandonment by Arab allies. The UAE could have issued a private warning to its citizens advising them to leave Israel quietly. It could have worked through back channels to reduce Emirati presence without public announcements. Instead, the UAE published an official ministry statement that was immediately picked up by international media and that explicitly prohibits Emirati travel to Israel going forward. That is not operational security, that is political signaling. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the gap between public statements about Arab-Israeli normalization and actual Gulf strategic calculations becomes impossible to ignore. Gulf Arab states signed the Abraham Accords for three reasons. First, shared concerns about Iranian influence and ambitions. Second, access to Israeli technology, particularly in defense, agriculture, and cybersecurity. Third, to maintain favorable relations with the United States, which strongly pushed for normalization. None of those motivations has disappeared. But the UAE's calculation has now added a fourth factor, that association with Israel in the coming conflict may carry costs that outweigh the benefits of the relationship. Those costs include potential Iranian retaliation against UAE territory if the UAE is perceived as facilitating Israeli or American military operations. They include damage to the UAE's relationships with other Arab and Muslim nations if it is seen as complicit in Israeli actions. And they include the domestic political risk within the UAE itself, where public opinion has never been enthusiastic about normalization, and where images of Palestinian casualties create political pressure even in an authoritarian system. By evacuating its citizens now, before conflict erupts, the UAE is creating political distance. It is positioning itself to claim neutrality or at least non-involvement when the conflict begins. The message to Iran is, we are not Israel's allies in this fight. The message to Arab and Muslim populations is we are protecting our citizens and not enabling Israeli actions. And the message to Israel, whether Israel wants to hear it or not, is you are on your own. Received. That is announcement number two. Announcement number three, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The UAE evacuation is triggering a cascade effect among other Gulf states and Arab nations that normalized relations with Israel. This is not one country making an isolated decision. This is the beginning of systematic Arab disengagement from the Abraham Accords framework in response to strategic realities those accords did not anticipate. Within 6 hours of the UAE announcement, Bahrain issued a similar travel advisory urging its citizens to leave Israel immediately. Bahrain's statement was less forceful than the UAE's and did not include an outright prohibition on travel, but the message was the same: get out now. According to reporting by Reuters, Morocco, which also signed the Abraham Accords, is conducting an internal review of its citizens currently in Israel and is expected to issue guidance within the next 48 hours. Even more significantly, Qatar, which did not normalize relations with Israel, but which has served as a mediator in Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, has suspended all communication channels with Israeli officials pending developments in the coming weeks. That suspension was confirmed by a Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson in a statement released this morning. Egypt, which has had a peace treaty with Israel since 1979, has reportedly reinforced security along the Sinai border and is restricting movement through the Rafah crossing point into Gaza. Think carefully about what this represents. When the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Qatar, and Egypt, countries spanning the Gulf, North Africa, and the Levant, all take defensive and distancing measures regarding Israel within a 72-hour period, that is not coincidence. That is coordinated response to shared intelligence about imminent developments. These governments are seeing something in their briefings that tells them the situation is about to deteriorate dramatically and that they need to create distance now, before they are caught in the fallout. And what does Israel say about all of this? The Israeli Foreign Ministry released a statement thanking the UAE for the strength of bilateral relations and expressing confidence that normalization will continue to deepen. That statement is diplomatic boilerplate that ignores the reality of what an evacuation order represents. You do not evacuate your citizens from a country you consider safe or from a partnership you believe is stable. You evacuate when you believe your people are in danger and when you believe the risks outweigh the relationship. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and international media is covering the logistics of evacuations while deliberately avoiding the strategic implications for the entire architecture of Arab-Israeli relations. The official narrative from Washington and Jerusalem is that the Abraham Accords represent irreversible normalization and that temporary security challenges will not undermine the fundamental strategic alignment between Israel and moderate Arab states. President Biden reaffirmed American support for expanded normalization just last week. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that the Abraham Accords have created a new Middle East where Israel and Arab nations stand together against common threats. But consider what has actually happened in the past 72 hours. The UAE, Israel's most prominent Arab partner, has ordered all its citizens to leave Israeli territory. Bahrain has issued similar warnings. Other Abraham Accords signatories are reviewing their positions. No Arab state has offered military support to Israel. No Arab state has publicly endorsed potential Israeli military action against Iran. And multiple Arab governments are actively creating political and physical distance from Israel in advance of conflict everyone now expects. That is not strategic alignment. That is strategic abandonment. And the reason for it is brutally simple. Gulf Arab states miscalculated. They believed normalization with Israel would strengthen their position against Iran. They believed Israeli military and intelligence capabilities, combined with American backing, made Israel a valuable partner. But now, facing the prospect of direct, large-scale Iranian military action against Israel, Gulf states are realizing that Israel may not be as strategically secure as they assumed, and that association with Israel may draw Iranian retaliation they cannot afford. Furthermore, Gulf states are reading the same intelligence about American military posture that everyone else with access is reading. They see that the United States has not significantly reinforced its presence in the region. They see that American aircraft carrier deployments have been limited. They see that President Biden has made statements about not wanting the conflict to escalate, but has not made absolute commitments to defend Israel against Iranian attack. Gulf states are concluding, rationally, that the United States may not intervene decisively if Iran attacks Israel, which means Israel may lose, and they do not want to be on the losing side. If you are an Israeli diplomatic official watching Emirati citizens board evacuation flights right now, what is happening is not a temporary adjustment. It is the unraveling of the entire strategic premise of the Abraham Accords. Those accords were supposed to create Arab-Israeli coalitions against Iran. Instead, when Iran actually threatens military action, the Arabs are evacuating. That exposes the normalization as transactional and shallow, not strategic and durable. And if you are an Iranian military planner observing this Arab disengagement, what lesson do you draw? You draw the lesson that Israel is more isolated than it appears, that its Arab partnerships dissolve under pressure, that military action against Israel will not trigger Arab opposition or intervention. That emboldens escalation rather than restraining it. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to October 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Egypt and Syria launched surprise attacks against Israel. At the time, most observers assumed other Arab states would join the conflict in support of Egypt and Syria. Jordan, which had fought Israel in 1967, did not intervene. Lebanon maintained neutrality. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states provided financial support but no military forces. Why? Because those governments calculated that their interests were better served by staying out of a war whose outcome was uncertain. 53 years later, in April 2026, Gulf Arab states that actually signed peace agreements with Israel are making the same calculation. They are staying out. They are evacuating their citizens. They are creating distance. The difference is that in 1973, Arab states stayed out of a war against Israel. Today, Arab states are staying out of a war to defend Israel. That represents a fundamental shift in how Arab governments view Israel's strategic position and viability. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, conflict averted and normalization preserved. In this scenario, diplomatic efforts succeed in preventing the large-scale Iran-Israel conflict everyone now expects. The UAE and other Arab states quietly resume normal relations with Israel. Evacuated citizens return, the Abraham Accords continue. This is the optimistic scenario, but it requires either Israeli restraint or Iranian restraint that neither side has demonstrated recently, and it requires American diplomatic intervention that has been notably absent. The likelihood is low. Path 2, limited conflict and partial Arab re-engagement. Under this scenario, Iran and Israel exchange strikes, but the conflict remains limited and does not expand into regional war. Arab states maintain distance during the fighting, but gradually re-engage with Israel once hostilities end, framing their evacuations as prudent safety measures rather than strategic abandonment. This is the most likely path if the conflict remains contained. It allows Arab states to preserve relationships while avoiding direct involvement. Path 3, large-scale war and collapse of the Abraham Accords. This is the scenario where Iran conducts devastating strikes against Israel, Israel retaliates against Iranian territory and proxies, the conflict expands to include Hezbollah and possibly other actors, and Arab states conclude that association with Israel is strategically untenable. Normalization agreements remain technically in force but become hollow. Trade collapses, diplomatic presence is reduced to minimal levels. The Abraham Accords exist on paper but not in practice. This path becomes more likely if the conflict produces high casualties, significant damage to Israeli infrastructure, or Israeli military actions that Arab publics find indefensible. I think we are closer to path 3 than American or Israeli officials are willing to admit. The speed and decisiveness of the UAE evacuation, the cascade effect among other Arab states, and the absence of any Arab willingness to publicly support Israel all suggest that Gulf states expect the coming conflict to be severe and that they have already decided not to be implicated in it. But here is what I find most significant. The UAE did not wait for the conflict to begin. It did not wait to see how severe it would be. It evacuated preemptively based on intelligence about what is coming. That suggests the intelligence is not ambiguous. It suggests Gulf states are being told with high confidence that major Iran-Israel conflict will occur and that it will be the kind of conflict where citizens of neutral countries need to be gone before it starts. Here are the questions I want you to take away. Will Saudi Arabia, which has been negotiating its own normalization with Israel, continue those negotiations after watching the UAE evacuate its citizens from Israeli territory? Will other Abraham Accords signatories follow the UAE's lead and impose restrictions on their citizens traveling to Israel? And most critically, if large-scale conflict does occur and Israel suffers significant damage, will any Arab state that normalized relations maintain those relationships under domestic political pressure? Tell me in the comments what you think the UAE evacuation signals about the timeline for Iran-Israel conflict. Tell me if you believe the Abraham Accords will survive this crisis, or if we are watching the end of Arab-Israeli normalization in real time. We will keep tracking every development in Gulf state policies, in Arab-Israeli relations, and in the intelligence assessments driving these evacuation decisions. That is what the Professor Marandi Report does every single day. Subscribe now Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what the UAE evacuation actually means for the future of the Abraham Accords and regional stability. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.